Season 1, Episode 4. The company that owned a continent, UNRO, Shadow Practice. Welcome to your Shadow Practice session. Today we look at the corporate empire. From the boardroom to the battlefield. Focus on the T and D sounds. Control your breathing. Master the English of world trade. Let's begin. The script. Before there was Google. Before there was Amazon. There was the company. In the 1700s. If you lived in London, you didn't fear the government. You feared a logo. A simple mark on a wooden crate. The mark of the East India Company. They didn't just sell tea. They didn't just sell silk. They sold influence. They had their own army. They had their own currency. They had their own laws. They were a business that acted like a god. This is the story of the company that owned a continent. A story of greed, gunpowder, and the birth of globalism. The company was born in 1600. Queen Elizabeth I gave them a charter, a monopoly, the right to trade in the East Indies. But they weren't the first. The Portuguese were there. The Dutch were there. The seas were a deadly market. To do business, you had to be a warrior. They didn't start with soldiers. They started with ships. They sailed to the shores of India. The Mughal Empire was at its peak. It was the richest empire on earth. The British looked like beggars compared to the emperors of Delhi. But the British had a secret weapon. Not guns. The joint stock model. This was the first heist. In the old world, if a ship sank, the merchant was ruined. But the East India Company was shared. Thousands of investors bought stocks. They spread the risk. This gave them infinite capital. They could lose a ship and just send two more. They were the first algorithm of capitalism. They were built to scale. By the mid-1700s, the Mughal Empire began to fracture. The center could not hold. The company didn't wait for permission. They moved into the void. They hired their own private army. Not British soldiers, but sepoys. Indian soldiers trained in European tactics. In 1757, at the Battle of Plassey, a man named Robert Clive, a clerk turned commander, defeated the Nawab of Bengal. It wasn't just a military victory. It was a corporate takeover. Clive didn't ask for land. He asked for the Diwani, the right to collect taxes. Think about the audacity. A private company was now the tax collector for the richest province in India. They weren't selling goods anymore. They were extracting a nation. They turned India into a revenue stream. They bought Indian goods with Indian tax money and sold them back to Europe for gold. It was the most efficient theft in history. But the company became too heavy. Corruption was the cancer in the ledger. Employees were getting rich on the side. They were called nabobs. They returned to London with diamonds and palaces, while the people of Bengal were starving. In 1770, a famine hit. Millions died. But the company didn't lower the taxes. They raised them. They had to protect the shareholder dividend. This led to the first global bailout. In 1773, the company was too big to fail. They were almost bankrupt from greed and war. The British government had to step in. They gave the company a loan. But they also gave them a task. They told the company, "Sell your surplus tea to America." This led to the Boston Tea Party. The American Revolution didn't start because of a king. It started because of a corporation. The Americans didn't want a monopoly telling them what to drink. The octopus was losing its tentacles in the West, but it was strangling the East. For the next 100 years, the company ruled India. They introduced railroads. They introduced telegraphs. They introduced English. But they weren't doing it for progress. They were doing it for throughput. They wanted the cotton, the opium, and the tea to move faster. They were the engine of the Industrial Revolution in Manchester. Indian poverty was the fuel for British wealth. But you cannot rule a continent with a balance sheet. In 1857, the system broke. The Great Rebellion. The sepoys realized they were being used to enslave their own people. The war was brutal. The company won the battles, but they lost the contract. The British government realized that a corporation could no longer manage an empire. They liquidated the company. The Crown took over. The company that once owned India became a memory, but the process lived on. What is the audit of the East India Company? They invented the modern corporation. They showed that capital has no nationalism. They showed that business can be more powerful than politics. They were the ancestors of the modern tech giants. Look at the world today. We have companies that have their own courts. We have platforms that control the speech of nations. We have entities that are richer than countries. They don't use gunpowder anymore. They use user agreements. They don't tax your grain. They tax your attention. The company didn't die. It just dissolved into the global market. We are all citizens of a corporate world that started in a small office in London 400 years ago. The logistics are different. The language has changed. But the goal is still the same. Monopoly. Efficiency. Dividend. Stay sharp. The contract is long. And the small print is everything.